potential factors to mitigate, to reduce the risk, and then the analysis of future conditions, basically related to climate change and socioeconomic changes that would modify current fire risk conditions. And the fourth aspect is the integration of all these aspects to provide a comprehensive and holistic view of how fire risk can be better managed. The project was built around a very wide consortium, in 36 partners from 17 countries, including some non-European countries. The idea was to represent different backgrounds, different specialities, but also different environments. So that not because fire is not just a Mediterranean issue, but also is affecting growingly Central and Northern Europe, particularly when we consider future climatic conditions. The project has 6 main study sites, we call pilot sites. One of them is covering the whole European territory. The target resolution is 1 kilometer. And 5 smaller areas that are representatives of conditions in Mediterranean countries, 3 of them, Central Europe and Northern Europe in the southern part of Sweden. These areas were targeted to be analyzed at a higher spatial resolution, 1 hectare, and having obviously much more local information to improve the modeling of risk conditions. But the idea is to have a single structure for all them. So part of the project was dedicated to define a comprehensive list of variables that are related to the different aspects of fire risk. And basically, we consider 3 main dimensions of risk: danger, meaning the probability that the fire occurs, ignites, or propagates; exposure would be, let's say, the areas potentially affected by fire; and vulnerability, meaning the different impacts, expected impacts of fires in socioeconomic aspects, including human lives and properties, and ecological values. So this scheme is basically the main driver of the project. Around that, we define 3 main work packages. The first one dealing with assessment of risk conditions, the second on reduction, analysis different factors of reduction, and then the third on adaptation, basically interested in establishing future risk conditions. The integration of all these 3 aspects and work packages is a dedicated task. Actually, this seminar is part of this work package dealing with integration of risk conditions. And then we also have 2 other work packages aiming to demonstrate the product developments in the different pilot sites and demonstration areas. And another one on dissemination activities, including fire policies, fire management policies, but also the efforts to disseminate our results to end users and the scientific community. As I said, one of the main outcomes have been the development of this integrated strategy to consider all the main factors dealing with fire risk. This scheme was published last year, and it has been very well accepted by the community with a very high number of quotations, and also it has been selected as editor choice of this journal. Some examples of the variables that were included in this integrated scheme. I am showing basically examples from the European territory, but also this has been developed for different pilot sites. As I said, some examples are, for instance, ignition probability, in this case, analyzing the historical patterns of fire occurrence. and the examination, let's say, of factors that are explaining that spatial pattern, which include both physiological condition, bioclimatic conditions, but also human aspects, no, like population density or density of livestock in different areas of Europe. We also have been quite active in generating new variables for the project. First of all, we proposed a classification of fuel types that was also very well accepted by the community. This fuel type classification was based on satellite remote sensing data, plus also auxiliary information, including bioclimatic models to estimate the differences in shrub or grass in terms of propagation possibilities. We also extended, let's say, or converted this fuel type in a fuel model map using the Scott and Burgan categories, and these fuel models have been used for fire propagation simulations. In addition to the standard fuel models, we also have been developing methods to put numbers on specific pixels, in this case using LiDAR sensors on board of the space station with calibration based on airborne LiDAR. So just for forest canopies, we were able to estimate the forest canopy height, the canopy cover, the canopy base height, the crumble density, and the canopy density, which are necessary for modeling fire propagation at canopy level. Fuel moisture content also has been derived from satellite data, in this case using relative transfer models to estimate the proportion, let's say, of moisture in relation to the fuel dry weight. As you know, this is an important variable also for fire propagation that is commonly not used because it is only indirectly estimated from meteorological data. But in this case, it was directly estimated from satellite data using Sentinel-3, which is part of the Copernicus constellation of satellites. Using the meteorological variables like fuel moisture content, fuel types, and fuel models, we were able to apply the standard behave and FLAMAP equations to the whole European territory to estimate static conditions, meaning in this case extreme conditions historically accurately in Europe, but also daily data. So this system has been running for a short period of time in the summer of 2024 as a way of showing that this integration is feasible. So this is the first branch, let's say, of the integration scheme, the danger one. And the exposure was based on the analysis of wild-urban interface. This was modeled at a very high resolution, 10 meters, using Sentinel-2 data, and then summarized at 1 square kilometer for the European territory. In terms of vulnerability, we have basically addressed two aspects, socioeconomic aspects and ecological aspects. For the sociological aspects, we consider the value of houses, but also the socioeconomic services derived from related to fire, being affected by fire, as timber, grazing, mushrooms, recreational aspects, soil erosion, and carbon stocks. In terms of ecological vulnerability, we consider ecological values, considering the biodiversity, the status of conservation, the functional types. And those values were modeled in a framework that consider the capacity of the different areas to resist fire. We call coping capacity that, and also the recovery potential, not the number of years in which those services will not be available. That is the first work packages dealing with risk assessment, in which we have been generating the integrated index for the summer of 24 and also for static historic conditions to model that for mitigation purposes that I will mention later on. In terms of work package 2 mitigation activities, we have been analyzing the large fires of Europe occurring in the years in which the project has been live, 21, 22, 23, and establishing the main factors leading to those extreme conditions. Also, there has been some efforts to improve modeling of these conditions leading to extreme fires, particularly junction fires, merging fires, adaptive fires, fire wheels, spotting fires, canyon fires, etc. In terms of mitigation purposes, we have been analyzing the impact of different fuel treatments, fuel management strategies, and basically considering the factors that provide suitability of different territories for that. We consider three main strategies: herbivory, prescribed burn, and mechanical removal. And for each area of the European territory, the most suitable combination of these strategies have been defined. In terms of fire adaptation, the first thing that was done in the project was to simulate future conditions using different climate and land use models. These climate models were used for different socioeconomic scenarios defined by the IPCC. And in each of these scenarios, it was taking, let's say, the upper and lower limit of the different models available to obtain an estimation of conditions, of climate conditions, and during this whole century until 2100. The resolution for these simulations was 9 kilometers, but again, that resolution was required because there is a very high computation burden of using all these models. From these models, the fire weather index of the future was computed and considering different intervals of risk and the modeling of future conditions, like how risk conditions would change. In this, when just considering the meteorological aspect was done and in the process of being published. In terms of land use scenarios and the integration of land use and climate conditions, there has been integrated analysis between the two groups that are experts on these aspects, socioeconomic, the land use one in the Netherlands and the climate one in Germany, in Potsdam. And the integration of these two aspects have been done through the dynamic global vegetation models that consider fire as a specific module and therefore estimate the potential burn area that would occur as a result of socioeconomic and climate conditions. And as you see, these scenarios and these two scenarios basically foresee a future increase in potential burn area pretty much all around Europe. Finally, we have been working in the last few months in modeling different mitigation scenarios based on the standard integration model. We have been establishing scenarios for 5 different mitigation strategies: reducing ignition probability, reducing fuel load, reducing canopy pool density, increasing coping capacity, and reducing recovery time. So these simulations are based on the integrated scheme that was implemented into a dedicated code that has been very useful for running these simulations. In this case, we have started from simulating the decrease in each variable, separate independently, let's say, and now we are working in integrating all these scenarios together. So we will provide almost 3,000 simulations then to analyze which factors are more relevant. In this case, these are the outputs of what would be the final risk conditions if we assume that the probability of human emission will be reduced by 10%, by 20%, or by 30%. And what would be the output in terms of the decrease in danger as a result of these actions. And this is another example. In this case, the reduction of fuel load, again, considering 10, 20, and 30% of reduction, and what would be for different ecosystems in Europe, land cover and ecosystem, what would be the impact of doing this reduction. This is obviously another average values, but also you'll see that there is a high distribution depending on where we are in Europe. Similar thing in this case is geographical representation of what would be the reduction in flame length, for instance, in case of reducing fuel loss by 10, 20, and 30%, which areas in Europe will be more affected by that, which typically are those that are in which the majority of fires occur at surface level. So croplands and grass are pretty much favored by that. In this case, we are analyzing what will be the impact of the final integration index, what we call IRI, and the integrated risk index, considering 3 different mitigation strategies. So in this case, we are modeling which one of these mitigation strategies would have a higher impact in different fuels. So, for instance, in the case of the reduction of emission probability, the impact would be higher in grasslands or croplands or woody croplands, while, for instance, a reduction of fuel load and fuel depth or ground wool density would have a higher impact in forested areas, in forest canopies. All these developments are being published in the webpage of the project, as well as in the dedicated papers, and where you have information about the different deliverables and the contacts of the different people involved in the project in the webpage of the project. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can just use the questions and answer window. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emilio, for your presentation of the results of the project. I will now share my screen. Okay, and we'll present you the integrated wildfire risk management strategy for Europe. First of all, I would like to tell that this is a webinar that we organized in the context of fire risk. It was initially planned to be a meeting with the members of the Fire Risk Observatory, and I welcome those that are present in the meeting, and there will be a time dedicated for them to intervene. But I will start now this presentation on the integrated wildfire risk management from the project. As you saw, as it was mentioned by Professor Emilio, the project is coming to an end. It will end at the end of March, and we are now disseminating the main products of the project. And for sure, one of them is this strategy to integrated wildfire management. Actually, in the title of the project, we had this objective, and also it's defined in our proposal as the first objective to develop a novel integrated strategy for holistic risk-based fire behavior. And this was accomplished in the project in various tasks. And we had this deliverable that was entitled this. This task was developed in two activities of work package 4. And in one of them, we developed a conceptual framework for integrating risk assessment, which is essentially what Professor Emilio presented in his presentation. And that is, let's say, the core of the project. But we had also the aim to produce this roadmap for integrated wildfire risk management. This is deliverable 4.5, which will be the essence of my presentation today. Both deliverables are public, so they are available to anyone who wants to read and study them. And they will also be soon published as scientific papers. To perform this study on the integrated fire management, of course, we did a literature review. And one of the things we found is that we are moving from what is the classic fire management approach that was based essentially on prevention and suppression, sometimes considering the use of fire. In the last year, we have moved to a more integrated fire management that includes, besides the previous aspects, also takes into content the socioeconomic needs and also the pharmacological implications of fire. And this is the integrated fire management. In terms of definitions, in this study, we came also across a dual definition of holistic versus integrated wildfire management. And I'll not go into details. You can see this diagram showing, let's say, the specific aspects of each one of them. And we find that integrated wildfire management should consider all aspects. We cannot say that we are dealing with this thing and putting that other thing apart. So we want to encompass both perspectives. And this is the approach that we made in the project, and we are proposing in the document. So the contents of this document, this deliverable, are this. We have an introduction. We made an overview of existing frameworks, and then we developed an action plan and roadmap aimed mainly for Europe as a whole territory, but also could be applicable to the countries and also to regions. And this action plan is based on these elements. We define what we call a management strategy, a framework, and risk governance institutions. And then it comes with a conclusion. This is summarized in this diagram that I show here on the right. You can see that for whole Europe, we try to define a scientific strategy for the risk management, then a framework, and the governance and policies. We call the set of these three elements the integrated wildfire risk management system. So that is the set of these three elements. This is again depicted in this slide. Above we have the strategy. We call it scientific, but it is essentially based on knowledge. Knowledge can come from science, but can come also from practice and experience from the citizens and from the practitioners. The other element of the system is the framework, where the conclusions from the science, from the knowledge, are translated into principles, into objectives, into goals, and also guidelines. And finally, the third element is risk governance. That's the structure of entities that will manage the risk and will define the priorities. All this entire system is at the service of the society. And society we see here as the whole set of stakeholders, and one very important are citizens. The citizens are a central element of this system, because all the system is aimed to serve them, and they should be also part of the system in different ways. Of course, we looked at existing frameworks, and there are several of them. And in the document, we made a revision of the, let's say, core elements of each one of them. And we focused our attention on the landscape fire governance framework, because it's the latest and it is, let's say, the more updated. We find that in these different frameworks that were developed by countries and even international bodies during the different years, there are some specificities, but there are also many common elements. And we see also a move towards consensus around certain ideas that we think that should be kept and, let's say, approved. And our proposal is very much around this landscape fire governance framework. So we then design the action plan and roadmap for integrated wildfire risk management in Europe. And this is built around the inputs that we got from different agencies and people. We involve different actors in the system. We work at different scales, from international, from the European scale, national, regional, and even local. And also we are looking at different time scales. We are based on past conditions and the present situation and aiming for the future cases, as was also mentioned. And we have these three components that I've mentioned of the system. The integrated wildfire management strategy, as I said, is based on knowledge, and this knowledge comes from scientific research and also from experience. And in the Fire Risk Project, we developed very much this, especially we tried to make research to understand the processes, the factors that are involved in the whole problem of wildfire risk management, including all phases and scales of development and application. As Emilio explained, we developed a very extensive work. Of course, it's not complete, it's not perfect. There are many things still that have to be developed and better, let's say, deepened. But we developed a methodology to assess the risk, to see how we can reduce it and how we can adapt to the future conditions. This strategy was mostly developed in the deliverable 4.4, which will be the object of a webinar like this one in the near future. You saw already this diagram. This is the, let's say, something that was developed in the project based on previous ideas, and all our work was built around this diagram. This diagram actually shows the implications of the different components of risk. Sometimes people consider risk just as danger, just a thing that is derived from meteorological conditions. But we went further and we included some elements that are quite difficult to quantify and to materialize, that are the exposure and vulnerability. And if we could understand all these arrows, all these processes, we would, of course, dominate the issue of wildfire risk, which is our objective. As Emilio said, we proposed a methodology to calculate the integrated risk index that is based on all those aspects. And we have now a methodology where we can calculate this for the entire Europe every day. And we studied methods to reduce this risk and also to look at the future conditions in different scenarios, as was explained. Well, based on this strategy and on the research that we made, we then propose a framework for Europe. The contents of this framework are in the document and are shown here in this box on the side. There is, of course, an introduction where we show that Europe as a whole has quite diverse situations related to wildfire. Some countries are more, let's say, prepared and more attentive to the problem, but others not so much. So it is necessary that Europe as a whole takes a position on this. And this is why we are proposing or recommending this framework. And I can say that the European Commission is very attentive to this work and is working with us to promote this study. In the document, we address some cross-sectoral issues, and we describe some of them. They are not yet, let's say, very detailed, but because the document has a length limit, but we describe some aspects. And all of these were studied in the project, and we highlight them. For example, in the relation to cross-sectional issues, I must say that we brought some ideas from the landscape governance framework, and we added some specific conclusions that came from the fire risk project. These are highlighted in blue. I will not read them, but they're available to you. But basically, we let's say, support and we bring the ideas from the framework, landscape framework. One of the elements of a framework usually is the development of a vision, what we want, because the framework will define the objectives, the goals, and also the guidelines, the way to reach there. And we propose this vision. Of course, it's open for discussion. It's a proposal, and we based our ideas in the previous visions that we found in other frameworks. But to show that this is, let's say, now under discussion, I'll show you an alternative formulation that was brought up by Nicholas Feb, who is our project officer, in meetings that we are having to discuss this issue with him and also with other projects, other European projects, in preparation of a document that will be presented next May to the European Commission. We are looking at this subject, and this is an alternative formulation. Of course, it is now open for discussion. In the framework, we have principles, and you can see here the various principles that are listed here. They come also from different frameworks, and we retain two main principles that are more or less common to all frameworks. One is the idea of moving away from a silo mindset. This is, of course, a corollary of the integrated management, because in the integrated management, we are looking at all aspects, at all scales, and we are considering the involvement of everyone. So we cannot close ourselves, and we should work together, and this is expressed in this principle. The other one is very similar to this one. That is the recommendation to avoid a partisan approach. Let's say each person, each institution cannot work closed on itself, but it should be open to other institutions as well. And there are a list of other principles that you can see here, and they are described in the framework, in the document that we produced. One important guideline is this impact orientation. All the systems should be made to the benefit of the citizens. And a corollary of this that we consider is that the protection of human life is above all priorities. I must say that this is not consensual. There are some guidelines that do not put this priority in the first place. We also have to recommend that we should consider uncertainties and future conditions. And in our work, we assessed several methods to reduce risk, namely the use of prescribed fire, as was also mentioned by Emilio. In the principles and guidelines, we recognize the need to have a good governance model. This governance is something that is derived from the strategy, from the framework, but it is something that should follow them. And this governance structure should, let's say, put in practice all the elements that are defined in the strategy and in the framework. We don't bother with how these governance is organized, but it's important that it follows the rules that are defined in the framework. One guideline is that rural areas must be developed and valued, as they are the place where the majority of wildfires develop. And this is something that we see in many countries, that rural areas are somehow not valued, and they don't receive the let's say, the recognition for the whole in this whole process, and it is necessary to change this thing. Then we have to look at the integrated management plan, because the wildfire risk management has different elements, different aspects, some that are, let's say, consider the value chain that includes these different phases of the fire, and it's important to have a common terminology. We also find that in the assessment of the wildfire risk, it's important to have let's say, transparent way of analyzing them, and we attempted that in the project, let's say, to develop a methodology to assess the risk of wildfire. And we also, as was said, propose a method that integrates not only danger, but also vulnerability and exposure to include the three elements of the risk. One concept that we also propose is the concept of wildfire risk tolerance, because different communities, according to their culture, will accept different ways the risk of wildfire. And for example, we are proposing some innovative ideas, that is, if even in Europe, if wildfires are occurring in some conditions, they could be left to spread in a controlled form to replace the role that prescribed fire should have and is not having yet, but to reduce the risk in the future. So this is some recommendation that we make. Regarding the value chain, that are the very different phases of the process of managing the risk, it's important to have a common terminology, and we see that different countries, different documents use different terms, and we propose these definitions that are in the landscape governance framework, and we collected for each one of them a series of recommendations of good practices to be followed in Europe in the various phases of the process. Some examples were given already about fire monitoring, the ignition reduction, initial attack, work with the communities, protection, public information, and burn recovery. So these are some examples of things that we are including in the document. And this framework chapter ends with these subjects that are referred here. The third part of the document is on the wildfire risk governance. This is not very much developed, because the main aim of this delivery was to work on the framework. But anyway, we are addressing some issues, mainly at the level of the European Union. First thing we recognize is that the wildfire risk management in Europe is very fragmented. It is dispersed in many DGs, in many policies, in many agencies, and there is not let's say, something that unifies these processes. So the risk of wildfire is everywhere and is present throughout the year, but the attention of the European Commission is not corresponding to this. So one recommendation that we make already in this document is the creation of an interagency dedicated to integrated wildfire risk management in the European Union. This concept of this agency will have, of course, different roles at different levels, different scales. They are somehow depicted in this diagram. We recognize that in different countries, historical background has created multiple agencies, and we cannot change them, let's say, from one time to the other, because this is a system that also requires stability and good communication among all agents and the citizens. So we are not in favor of, let's say, creating revolutions, but we promote that these agencies should work together, should communicate and collaborate with each other and with the citizens. So we also recommend that there should be an European Wildfire Management Directive, as exists in many other fields of life in Europe, and that we should be adaptive to the future. We should include the results from scientific and technological research and development. And we also should have for Europe performance indicators and policy instruments. There are already some, but we think that they should be also better analyzed. To conclude, I'd like to say that in the Fire and Risk project, we proposed a roadmap of a system to promote this integrated and holistic management of wildfire risk. This system is based on a strategy, based on knowledge, a framework defining the objectives, principles, and guidelines, and a governance structure to implement this system at the service of the citizens. We propose also a strategy to better understand and assess the risk of wildfire in order to better mitigate and adapt to future conditions. And we propose the adoption of the landscape fire governance framework with its guidelines and principles, incorporating results of the literature survey and from our own research. And we recommended the revision of the wildland risk and of wildfire risk governance in Europe to ensure that the risk of fire is considered at all scales and levels, which is a thing that we don't feel exists now. Okay, with this, I end my presentation. I thank you for your attention, and I will now open the floor to the members of the observatory. They are free to speak, but if I may invite in particular Peter Moore to start to give us their assessment on this problem and their vision on this issue. Please, Peter.
Thank you very much, Domingos, and thank you to the Fire EU Risk group and all of the work for that very extensive consortium that's been put in over these years. I'm a bit shocked to realise that the whole thing will finish in March. For some reason, I had this feeling it was going to go much longer. It certainly achieved a lot, and congratulations on that. The roadmap, I think, is fantastic for a number of reasons. The first one of those is that the overview of existing frameworks is a really useful annotation of all of those different approaches. And you mentioned Canada, the UN, the FAO's fire management guidelines, which I noticed Carolina mentioned has been updated, the landscape fire governance framework, which is where you ended up, of course, the peer review process. The Canadians, of course, have been working on this sort of thing since 2003, when they had their very bad wildfires in the western part of their country. And of course, we've got other countries that I mentioned there. The value of that part of the document is that it brings all those things together in a way that any country that's interested within Europe, outside of Europe, somewhere else, can have a look and say, oh, okay, so other people have similar things, and all of that thinking has tended, as you pointed out, to come together. There is more in common than there is in difference. There is, of course, some terminology, but I think we're in fire management, and for those of us who've been in it for a very long time, know that terminology and wording will be with us for a very long time to come. It's just the way of things. And what that does is then feed in, I think, very well to the idea of the framing of a risk management framework, fire risk management framework for wildfires in Europe or anywhere else. And I think all of those elements that are there are terrific. The emphasis I really like is on the governance. There are many of us on this call. If we had another call in another time, there'd be many other people. And one of the key things about the governance, because it's not about government, is bringing people together, and bringing people together in a regular, routine way with a developing common language, a common set of principles, so that some of the sectoral interests can be dealt with, so that the interactions of sectors can be dealt with, and so that we can come together. And I think for Europe, built on, as it is, on all of the work that's come before, I mentioned Canada back to 2003, but of course there was research projects in Europe before that that have all been involved. So I think it's very well set out. I like it. I think a lot of people, as we go through the governance process of discussion, of interaction, of engaging with Europe about setting up an entity to deal with integrated wildfire risk management, a directive, those things are very active and dynamic processes. They often take a long time. But what will be important in that is the governance. It'll be, how are people interacting? How often are they interacting? What's the nature of that interaction? Is it routine? Is it rhythmic? Is it sensible and engaging? So congratulations on the work. Certainly, I'm very glad it's public. I'll be making it very widely available to people that that I know will be interested in it and can benefit from it. So thank you again to all of you for the work and the opportunity to to sift through it and read through it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. May I invite Lara if you want to give us your assessment on this?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Domingos, for this opportunity and for all the work that you and your team and partners developed. It's really fantastic, as Peter noted. And there is a lot of synergies between the work that you are doing and the work that we are developing in FAO. I think that most of you are familiar with, but FAO together with UNEP, other UN agencies, but also with other organizations, we are developing the Global Fire Management Hub. I will put in the chat the link so to everyone. Okay. So we have this initiative of the Fire Hub for sure. And there is a lot of connections with the work that you are developing and some key points that I heard today from all of you is this cross-sectoral approach that you are proposing in your work. And also with the Fire Hub, we are emphasizing this cross-sectoral approach to deal with fire. And we also adopt the concept of integrated fire management with a focus also on governance, because we need a matrix of governance to promote integrated fire management. So I think that the roadmap is really aligned with the Fire Hub, and we need to explore more the synergies and see how can we integrate all the work you did also with the Fire Hub and keep this initiative going and keep all the things you produced, keep this going and being used by everyone at European level, but also as an example for other regions. Because through the Fire Hub, we want to promote this integrated fire management approach at the global level, but with the focus on the regions, because the fires are happening in the regions, so we need to work in the regions. And also, you mentioned in the document the landscape fire governance framework. We are also collaborating with Portugal in this landscape fire governance framework to see how the Fire Hub can work as a mechanism to monitor the goals of that framework. And also another point that I see a lot of synergies is about the focus that you are putting in citizens, in communities. We also wanted to promote this with the Fire Hub. So there is a lot of connections and synergies, and let's keep in touch to integrate more these initiatives. And you mentioned, Peter mentioned about the terminology. We through the Fire Hub, probably we will also start to try to develop a common terminology. It's not for every country to adopt that, but to have a space where we can cooperate at the global level using the same terminology. And of course, each country, each region, each agency is free to adopt their own terminology or some things like that, because this is a huge aspect of fire management. And yeah, and just to mention also that, Domingos, I think that we will keep in touch, and as you also probably know, we will have the Fire Hub plenary in June this year. So this will be also a moment for us to be together and discussing deeply how can we integrate and cooperate in our initiatives and promote this in a more global scale. Yeah, congratulations and thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. Over.
And also, Peter, for your words. And I can assure you that we are working, although the project will end soon, but we are working to keep this legacy even after the project ends. At present, we are working with the other projects from Europe and also with the European Commission to see how these ideas can be applied in Europe. But of course, we are open to work with you as well at the FAO, at the United Nations. Okay, thank you. If I may now invite David Thomas to give us his assessment, please.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Domingos, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me, first of all, as a member of the observatory, and secondly, to give my comments on the document that has been produced. I can start by echoing, I think, Peter's comments that this is, in fact, in my opinion, a fantastic piece of work. It sets the foundation stone of which we can carry forward some of the observations and the recommendations in the report, and let's hope that it has a great future, because I think it is a very, very good starting point indeed. It's also an inspiring document, I think, because it does, it shows, it deals with a very difficult and very, very complex subject, but focus it down into three main components, as we were talking about earlier in your slide. Mainly strategy, framework and governance. And I think those are the key areas that need to be addressed for this to be a great success in the future. I pick on a point that Lara just made on the issue of terminology. Again, quite a complex subject, but common terminology, in my opinion, is vitally important so that there is common understanding between the many different entities involved in this subject as well. A slide which you showed, Domingos, if I may, on slide 21, and basically it was principles. It said, move away from a silo mindset, which only considers the sectorial vision and mandates, and instead adopt an integrated approach where responsibilities, resources, budgets, and good practice are shared, which are fully echo. I wonder if, in fact, lessons learned should also be included in this, because, as it says, a great deal is learned from things that have happened in the past, and it's a great opportunity. So I would suggest that may be an idea to put that in. The definition of wildfire risk management systems was mentioned, and it talks about assessing risk, but I think also maybe before that it should be identifying and assessing risk, because we can't assess it unless it's identified, and maybe that is something which could be considered as well. Our association, Safe Communities, is very much involved in communication, and I'm very glad to see that this has been included in the paper. And one of the difficulties, I think, is that in any particular country, we have so many stakeholders. We've got the immigrants, we've got visitors, and people speak many, many different languages. So maybe it should also include that communication should, as far as possible, be in a language that people understand. I think that's very important indeed. The vision, which was in section 233, in the Australian framework, Peter, yours includes tourism. And I think tourism is something we have to be very careful we don't overlook. It is mentioned in the paper, but tourists and the development of tourism in Portugal, develop tourism in the areas which some of the very high risk areas as well for fires in the Alentejo and places like this. So tourism plays an important part in the roadmap, in my opinion. We come to principles, and then it's transparency, that all procedures are performed according to established rules, clearly justifiable and subject to public reporting and scrutiny. I wonder there again, not only in addition to rules, but legislation as well. Clearly that legislation should be followed, or if it's not adequate, then adapted to the current and future circumstances. We covered communication a little bit. On the governance and collaboration, again, actually, that I noticed tourism again is mentioned on this, so it's clearly a very important topic. As you said, the proposed policy instrument in this framework is the form of the European Wildfire Management Directive. That's fully supported. And I see also there's consideration given to a European wildfire response unit. And that's something I think that should be considered. Of course, we got the EU civil protection mechanism and how that would harmonise. But that is something I think that is well mentioned, and we should support consideration for that in the future. And that's my main comments, Domingos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I would like to thank you in particular because you sent us already a document with the essence of these ideas, and for sure we are going to consider them in final versions of these documents. You mentioned the lessons learned. Of course, it's very important, and these are expressed in different parts of the document, namely in the memory, where they need to have a memory and to learn from the past. The tourism, as you mentioned, is very important, and we see that tourism is growing worldwide, but especially in some of these countries that are fire prone. So we should pay more attention to tourism and also to immigrants, people that come from other regions that are not so familiar with the problems that exist here. So thank you very much for your ideas.
Pleasure.
Okay. May I now invite Gabriel, also member of the observatory, if you want to give us your assessment on this problem.
Yes. First of all, I want to congratulate you and the whole consortium for a very integrated, very detailed, very in-depth work that you have done. And some things we know from the past, some things have been elaborated further, some new ideas have come, and scientifically, there is no question in my mind that you have been providing a very, very good contribution to the scientific part of forest fires. Bringing it all together is already an important contribution. Some of the questions, first of all, I want to comment about the idea on the silo approach and the non-partisan approach, which I think are critical to this. And the fact that you pointed out a list of EU agencies which are working on the issue from various sides, but not in an integrated way, it's very important. Of course, I always have in mind the reality in my country, where we have a ministry that supposedly tries to deal with climate change and civil protection, but the way it is being done creates exactly the idea that they want to be above all, not in an integrated way, but in a way of ordering. And that has limited effect. And especially when we have the socioeconomic part, which is not being treated well so far. because the people are, in my view, the core of what we need to do. And I would say I have been involved in a project called Res Alliance lately, which talks about resilience of the landscape. It's on the prevention side mostly, but it has shown me through the interaction with hundreds of people across Greece that they need guidance, they need understanding of their needs, because they are being offered, the people, the rural people, they are being pushed with many legislative initiatives that finally, rather than helping them stay on the site and do their work and be there, they are being pushed to leave. They are being pushed to abandon. For example, people who get to the age of, for example, 60 or 65, they don't want to continue doing their fields because they're not making money. They go to pension and they leave their villages, go to Athens or to Thessaloniki. And this is a major issue because an abandoned countryside is going to burn much more and there will be damages. Now, turf battles is one thing that I mentioned. There is another point that I have noted, which was about the definition that Fevre talked about. In my view, the emphasis, as we have described it in a 2020 publication, should be on reducing damages. Safety, increase the landscape safety and so on. At the end, it's reduce damages. So the emphasis is not in burnt area, but in reducing damages and doing it in a way that we understand the role of fire in there, and at the same time stop spending huge amounts which do not have a result in some cases. I don't think that, for example, what happened in California a few days ago was a matter of lack of funding. I think it was a matter of less attention to reducing damages than should have been made for something that we could foresee that could happen. Another thing is about the fact that a lot of what is being done in this project is based on remote sensing. And remote sensing is really great for large-scale assessment, but we should not forget that there is much more detail and much more understanding coming on the ground at local scale. So whereas one thing is very important and very useful, and all the tools and maps that you have produced, they're great, it would be nice if we have an understanding of the importance of having a local mechanism. Sometimes in recent policy approaches, and we have that in Greece now, we're talking about technologies, we're talking about models, but we forget that finally it's people on the ground that apply these things. And we should not forget that. One example, we have a forest service in Greece, which has gone from 5,000 people to 2,500 people in the last 20 years, and all of them at the age of 60 and above. That is clearly an indication of the fact that the government does not understand the need for people to apply these things. And finally, I want to make a reference to the safety issue that you have mentioned. Of course, people's lives are above all. There's no question about that. From the moment I was taught forest fires, the first priority was people's lives. This has not changed. And so what has changed is understanding what means safety. I mean, if you have a fire, in Greece we have that. If you have a fire at some point, and the tendency is any village around it, evacuate it, that creates further problems down the road. And we have seen that, and this is reflected in the fire statistics in Greece in the last 4 years. We have major fires with the strongest mechanism ever, because this change in policy throws the people away, pushes the people away, and then the firefighters have to stay in the village and fight the fire and to save the houses, especially in houses which are not like the Los Angeles houses. They are not as flammable as those. They are built with materials like the rest of the Mediterranean. So we need to be aware of this when we are trying to scale up across the globe. Okay, so this is a point I want to mention. We have to use evacuation in some cases, but for God's sake, we need to do that in advance and know under what conditions some places need to be evacuated and some places don't need to be evacuated because the people can stay in there and save themselves. And it's probably more risky if they are caught on the road. That's my contribution. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Thank you. I now invite Ulrich Cimolino, who is with us as well from the observatory, if you want to give us your assessment about this topic of integrated wildfire risk management. Ulrich, can you follow us? Okay, for some reason, Ulrich is not responding. Before we go through the question and answers that we have in the board, I would like to explain to those that are not so familiar with the project that the observatory of the project is the body that we created from the beginning of the project, inviting personalities from around the world, from different backgrounds, from different institutions, to contribute to work with us in the research work that we developed in the project. Let's say they gave us their assessment on different strategic points where to orient our work. And this webinar, as I mentioned at the beginning, is organized first of all as a meeting of this observatory to give us their assessment. Okay. We heard the opinions of the members of the observatory that are present, with the exception of Ulrich, which I suppose he may have some difficulties in reaching us. In the meantime, I will try to address some of the questions that you had made a favorite of putting in the thing. Sergey asked about, said that there is an update of the FAO voluntary guideline. We are aware of that, and I think that we also mentioned it and cited it, but it's present. It was asked why agro-industry is not considered as an actor, because they are a heavy driver of landscape changes. Well, they may not be mentioned explicitly, but for sure they are in our mind when we mention all the let's say the private institutions, private agencies, all the agriculture and industrial system. I think we mentioned them as entrepreneurs or enterprises, and this covers all the services and the industries that work around the forest, around the agriculture, and especially have something to do with the wildfire risk. Carmen Rodriguez asks about the collaboration among agencies and says it is desirable, but there are lack of incentives to do so and lack of institutional structures to promote this collaboration. Of course, we understand this, and we know that this is historically the situation in many countries. We don't aim with this document to change the things from one moment to the other, but I think the first thing that is very important is to change the mind of the people, to have everybody think on the same basis and accept the same ideas and principles. Because if one says one thing and the other says the other, one thinks that his opinion and his approach is better than that of the others, we don't go there. So this is the first thing that we recommend. First point, through research, through science, to understand the problems, because when you understand them, it's more difficult, let's say, to disagree and to say that there are different opinions. But of course, it may help to have in each country a service, or what you call an interagency, some agency that is not above the others, but it is at the service, putting them together. This, of course, may help. We are, of course, building on the example of Portugal, in which this attempt was made. I don't say that it was perfect, but I think that it had a great role during the past years, since 2018, in changing the landscape of the collaboration between the different stakeholders in Portugal. And I think that a similar approach could be done also at European level and also in different countries. It's asked about the greatest challenge in the country level to go ahead with the integrated wildfire risk management. I think that it's again the resistance that people can have to work out of their silos, because people feel themselves protected when they are working in their turf, and they don't want anyone to enter there, or they don't want to be bothered and to go elsewhere. So that is the main let's say, difficulty we see. So that's why we highlight these two principles as very important, to work out of the silos, to work without a partisan approach. And if these ideas are, let's say, spread out and they are accepted by everyone as we feel and as we understand, we believe it will be, I think that things will change. I can say that I'm in this business for 40 years already, and I've seen many changes in Portugal, in the other countries as well, but especially in Portugal, in the mentality and in the approach of the people. And I hope that these efforts may contribute to this. And coming from the scientific community, I think we have a very important role on this. We must, first of all, work together and also forget these silos and promote these common approaches to the problems. Sebastian Penzini also asks some questions. One of the questions is about the synergies with other EU projects. I think I already mentioned that we are working in a cost action that's called FireLog, and this cost action has one of the objectives to bring the research projects at Europe scale for wildfires, namely fire risk and the 3 Green Deal projects together to share their solutions, to share their thoughts. And especially now we are working in the definition of this common framework, and we are trying to promote this integrated. And as was said, we will try to share this again. Carolina asks a question for Emilio, and I will ask Emilio to address this, please. Nicholas is commenting on the need to bring together things from the ground and from what comes from remote sensing and other ways of getting information. And of course, we support this idea, and for sure in the project and in the consortium, and particularly in our team here in Coimbra, we work very much with both approaches, both from the ground and from the remote sensing, and we believe that this is critical and it is necessary, as you say. There's a question by Marty Rosell about the integration of the role of fire in the ecosystem. Of course, we address this, and as I think I showed, fire is the recognition of the importance of fire in the ecosystems, and the whole process of management is necessary. And in the fire risk project, we, for example, looked at the man-made ignitions, very often due to use of fire. Of course, we know that fire is necessary, but sometimes it's not appropriately used, and that's why we want to look not only at prescribed fire, at use of burns, but at agriculture, but even at the use of wildland fires that can be left in certain well-defined areas to burn. We understand that in Europe there is a lack of research, a lack of understanding of this. So this is a matter that we bring in the document, but we recognize that it is not yet well developed. I know that in Portugal there are already some experiments on this. In some fires, fire is left to burn when you know for sure that it will just affect areas that are not relevant, and it will not spread further. But this is not yet so developed as it is in the United States, for example. Okay, I ask Emilio, do you want to comment anything about that particular question or other comments that were made in the chat?
Thank you, Domingos. No, I was just answering now. The question is rather for Kirsten or anyone from the Potsdam Institute that did the climatological modeling. I'm not sure if they are attending here, but if they do, they can also extend the answer. Basically, the models that were used, they were selected because they consider a reasonable range of values, in terms of being, let's say, more or less optimistic in terms of climate change impacts. So they selected 3, considering the upper, the lower, and the middle range, and then they assembled them together. That's what I remember from the presentations of the group. Well, you have to consider that the project is quite large, and I was not involved in all the activities, but I'm more or less aware. But I don't have the technical issues. Say you want to contact them directly.
Okay. Thank you, Emilio. In the meantime, well, for those who don't know, Emilio is the scientific coordinator of the project, so he is the person that is in the back of many of the original ideas that we came up in the project. And I take this opportunity to thank him for his excellent work. There is now a question from Raquel Paula about the deadlines, and she asks if there is time for the data that we produced will be accepted, and we promote the creation of new rules and laws. And when you think that this additional pressure will be implemented by government agencies? Well, we understand that this is a slow process, and we have been working in this already for 3 or 4, almost 4 years. But we expect that the results of this activity will not be lost, let's say, when the project finishes. As I mentioned, we are working with other EU projects to promote these ideas, not just as papers, as documents, but also in concrete actions. And we intend to have meetings during this first semester with also members of the European Commission and European Parliament to present them our ideas, and some of them already know them. And we expect that they can be materialized as policies, as regulatory measures in the near future. Of course, we don't expect this to be immediate. Lara still mentioned also that the United Nations is doing a similar effort at a wider scale. Of course, we are open to collaborate with that, and we are very happy to see that the results of our work, of our research, are not kept just on shelves, but they at least gather the interest of the people. And I must say that we are even surprised by the attendance to this webinar. This shows how important this topic is, how attractive it is, and we expect that from this vast audience that we are having today to this webinar, from the entire world, or as I understand, will bring also some outcome to this. Peter, I see that you raised your hand, please.
I did. Thank you very much, Domingos, and thank you for all of the questions. I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that if you look at many of the questions and the answers, that the aspect of governance, and as I mentioned before, we're not talking about government, we're talking about how do people interact, how do they routinely, regularly interact, how do they get to know each other, How do they get to understand each other's perspectives? As Domingos mentioned before, different views, different opinions. We're all working towards the same social outcome. Gabriel mentioned, safety and the need for damage reduction. We're all working towards that. And the way that we build all these things together and use this excellent base that, as David pointed out, David Thomas, is through those interactions. So the researchers and the team that's come together has done a fantastic job of putting together a set of documentation that has data at its base, knowledge that it's built on, and then has conclusions, models and approaches that will help all of us to do these things to reduce that damage, as Gabriel mentioned. And so the way that happens from now on is not by leaving the documents on the shelf, as Domingos just said, the horror, the nightmare of all researchers and all people who've put together documents and studies and analyses. It's to commit and work hard and work with others at those processes that bring us together, community level, national level, across boundaries for certain types of interaction and so on. And that's where the strength of this will come from. In a decade's time, 2 decades' time, we'll look back and we'll think, okay, that's part of where this started. And as examples of that, we can look at Lara's working with FAO, the North American Forest Commission Fire Management Working Group has had more than 50 annual meetings. And that's the sort of duration, the sort of persistence of bringing people together that we're looking for. And of course, the expert group on forest fires of the European Union, the European Commission, which is not just the European Union itself, it's 42 countries. They've been meeting for over 25 years. And so it's those sorts of persistent engagements, as we mentioned, across the silos. Gabriel quite rightly drew attention to that list of European Union organisations on the left-hand side of that slide. And imagine the sort of effort we have to make to bring all of those people together sufficiently often, smoothly, routinely, in an engaging way so that they understand each other's perspectives and we can work collectively towards that goal that Gabriel mentioned of reducing the damage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I don't know if any other member of the panel wants to comment or to address some additional statements. Gabriel, you opened your microphone. No, okay, thank you. I ask again, Ulrich, if you want to say something about this issue. Otherwise, okay, I think that we are still on time, but I don't think we need to go to the end of the scheduled time. But I'd like to take this opportunity to inform you and to somehow announce you that we are going to organize other meetings like this, other webinars on different topics. And for this, I would like to invite Clelia Petru she's in charge of the dissemination activities of the project. If Clelia wants to say something about some of the upcoming webinars that we are going to have in the project, please.
Hello all. Thank you, Professor Viegas and Professor Churienko for this presentation and the webinar, and all the members of the Fire Risk Observatory, and also their amazing input. Yes, we have some upcoming webinars, mainly in the month of February and beginning of March. Please follow our social media and our website, which everything will be posted there. And also the recordings will be there for any future visit. So we will be sending you emails and we will be posting urgently a lot of times this couple of months coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Clelia. Well, in the meantime, I saw that Dr. Nikolaos Kalapodis asked a question about the change of the EU policy against, let's say, the aggressive fire suppression and fire exclusion that has proven effective. We entirely agree with you that this is not the way, let's say, to focus our attention on these subjects. And one thing that we, let's say, raise in the document is the possibility of the European Union being biased in this approach, because lots of these wildfire risk management in Europe is done through the DG ECHO. The DG ECHO is a civil protection unit that deals mostly with the fire, let's say, management, fire suppression, and may be missing the overall picture, the integrated picture. So I think this has to change. And with our document, with our ideas, I think we are also trying to put that. I must say that for us also, scientists, this was a learning process. We were pushed to look at these concepts first by the call for the project, which asked us to have this integrated view, to look at all aspects of fire. And all projects now in Europe, all research projects, ask explicitly that they cannot be dedicated to just prevention, suppression, or recovery. They have to cope the whole cycle of the activities in an integrated way, because they all are related and they have all, let's say, interactions and effects on each other. And we are, with this document, with this effort, we are working on that direction, and we entirely agree with you that we should do this at the EU level, at the national level, and also at the local level, because that's where the fires happen. Okay, Gabriel, please.
I cannot find the button here, so Okay, my question is, we discussed about the difficulties and the possibility of making one common approach at the European Union. The second point would be how much, because European Commission makes a lot of legislation which finally needs to be followed by the countries. They have to adapt their legislature to follow the guidelines of the European Union, for example, regarding climate change policies, etc. The point is, how can we move from the European Union to the countries so that if we finally develop a balanced conceptual approach at the European Union, not based only on the UCPM and so on, but guiding, bringing together everything regarding risk and about forest fires, how that, or if that should be possible to be, let's say, pushed down to the states. And I can see, starting from scratch, a difficulty in the very different level of importance of the forest fire problem in the north versus the Mediterranean. But there should be some kind of guidance in order to be really coordinated. We are trying to do that regarding firefighting, regarding civil protection after the effect, but after the problem. But it should be something that we would do in a more practical way, as less bureaucratic as possible. And that could be debated not only now, but also in the following webinars. It could be an issue in the agenda.
Thank you, Gabriel. For sure, we will address those points. We understand that this is, as you said, a very difficult case, a difficult approach, because it depends very much on the countries. As you mentioned, some countries have their own idiosyncrasy, their own organization, and it is sometimes difficult to go against or to face that. I think that this is a research project. We are from the scientific community, but of course we have worked very much with the stakeholders and even with the policy makers. And I think that our approach has to be fair. Let's say we don't have the truth. We don't know everything, and we don't want to impose any things as the truth, because we have to listen to the opinions, to the way the other people think and they do. And I think that little by little, especially if we accept, let's say, some basic principles, some guidelines, I think it will be easier to work together. if we scientists, we develop a knowledge on the problems and the process, it is also easier that we speak of the same things. I remember that 20 or 30 years ago, when I went to a meeting on fires, everybody was discussing, was arguing, was shouting, because they were ignorant. There were things that they didn't know, and so each one spoke about things. But I think that little by little we are understanding better some things. And also with this international effort that we have seen, and Peter Moore highlighted, that took years to build. And I think that we are converging to that. Of course, there will be always people that don't want to adhere, but what can we do? But our aim and our purpose is to support all the efforts that are being done now at the European level, and of course at the national and the local level when possible and necessary, to help with this, the building of these frameworks, with this consensus and this working together, because we are in a world where international collaboration is very important. And for that, we need to have this same common understanding and common language, not the same organization, but at least some basic principles that everyone can understand when you are talking about these goals, those objectives. They are the same for everyone. And that's what we are aiming with this work. And we count on you, and we thank you again for your participation, your presence and contribution. And as it was mentioned by Emilio as well, in the project we are open to all of you who attended and want to, first of all, to ask us questions and want to know more about the project. We'll be very happy to respond to all of you. And with this, I close the meeting, and thank you again, and invite you for the upcoming webinars that we will inform and announce you about them. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Have a good day all.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Domingos, and everyone.
Bye, David. Bye. Goodbye, Lara.
Bye.
In
Thank
touch,
you.
Lara, please.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Okay. When is that meeting in June? You said it's already fixed?
From the 10th to 12th.
12 to 12. Where is it?
Here in Rome.
Rome. Okay.
And yeah, but also we are